Hello everybody, this is Jessie from IamSoCrazy.com, and I am excited to be bringing you AllFreeSewing's Mystery Sew-Along this month. Now in this video I'm going to be showing you some tips for how to sew through thick materials or multiple layers of fabric, because that's something that can be tricky. In week 1 we made these fabric noodle shapes out of t-shirts, and then in week 2 we made this shape out of woven fabric that has one curved edge and 3 straight edges, and I have a smaller sample size here just so it's easier for you to see what's going on. And now this week we're going to be sewing the noodle shapes down along the marked lines. We're going to be sewing them to the woven fabric. So you're going to want to start by lining up your noodle shapes with the ends even with the side that is opposite the curved side. And I don't know if you've guessed what we're making yet, but it is a bath mat. It's going to be a fun, colorful, absorbent, practical addition to your home decor. And so line them up like this with the ends even with the edge opposite the curved side. And we're going to be sewing along each of these marked lines here. And my first tip to help you sew through thick materials successfully is one that you already know, but it's easy to forget sometimes. Lower your presser foot. If you have a thick material, it's easy to forget that because the presser foot might already be touching the material, but you're going to need to lower it or else you won't have any tension on your needle thread. And the second tip is you probably want to reduce the pressure on your presser foot. So this machine has a dial inside here. Some of them have one on the back, kind of near where the presser foot lifting lever would be. And some of them have a post on the top of the machine that's surrounded by a ring. So you would press on the ring to make the post pop out and leave the post sticking mostly out of the machine. And that will give you a lower presser foot pressure. You do want to take note of what setting it was on before you adjust it, because there's a good chance you're going to want to return it to that setting when you're done sewing your bath mat. Now, one other tip here. If you have a roller foot or a walking foot, it is a good idea to use them. A walking foot has a double feed that feeds the material from the top as the feed dogs feed it from underneath. So if you have one, that's kind of the top choice there. A roller foot has almost little wheels on the bottom of it so that it rolls over the fabric noodles instead of creating friction and trying to push them ahead of the presser foot. So go ahead and use one of those two if you have them. And make sure that your stitch length is a little bit longer. I'm using about a 3mm, 8 stitches per inch, somewhere in there. And it's a triple stitch. So it takes 2 stitches forward and 1 stitch back. Some machines might call it a straight stretch stitch, but it's a very sturdy self-locking stitch that makes a very durable bath mat or whatever heavy-duty project you're working on. So the bath mat will stand up to being machine washed and stepped on and being put through everything that you put a bath mat through. It should hold up very well. And you might also find that you need to reduce your thread tension. That's something that I recommend testing first with a scrap of the same materials that you're using here. So a couple extra little fabric noodles and an extra piece of that same fabric. And just see how your machine handles it. See if it's trying to push the noodles ahead of the presser foot instead of sew over them. And if it is, you might need to reduce your thread tension, increase your stitch length, reduce the pressure on the presser foot a little bit more. Maybe you need to change your presser foot. But that's just something that you're going to have to figure out, do a little test, and make sure that everything is good to go before you start. And I am randomizing my pattern of fabric noodles. You don't have to. You can do strips, you can make polka dots, you can make a pattern if you want to. I think this is such a fun, random project that it just looks really good with all the strips completely randomized. So I don't do a pattern, I don't do stripes, but you can definitely do that if you want to. So we're going to line them up a few inches at a time and sew over them. Try not to have the little noodles sitting on top of each other. Try to have them just packed together, one right after another along this line. But if they do cross over each other a little bit, it's okay. This is a very free-form project. Nobody will be able to see if your lines of stitching aren't perfectly straight when we're done. It's going to be a very high pile, textured, just a fun project that nobody's going to notice any skipped stitches or any little problems like that. So that's one reason it's so great for beginners. So just keep going along. And when you get eventually to the end of your row, you may find that when you sew off the end, the presser foot is tipping down a little bit, and that can cause problems with some machines feeding or getting stuck at the end. So if you need to, use a hump jumper, which that can be a fancy sewing notion or a little gadget, but it can also be a folded scrap of fabric that's folded to be about as thick as whatever you're sewing over. And you just put it under the toes of your presser foot to make it level and even. And you don't want to sew through the hump jumper. You just want to use the hump jumper in front of the presser foot to level everything out. But you just use the hand wheel to make sure you're not catching the hump jumper in your stitches. And then back tack, and you are good to go. And you can use the hump jumper at the beginning of your line of stitches too if you want to. If that's easier for your machine to feed, then go for it. So you can see as we get to the end of the line, we are going to fold the fabric noodles into little loops. And the loops don't have to all be perfectly the same, but I do about 2 inches. And you fold them over and start sewing the next line of stitches. And I also cross the loops over each other. So if I just sewed all the noodles in the same position on each row, then I would have stripes. So I just fold them till they're about 2 inches long and sew them down again, and then you'll do the next row and the next row. And then when we're all done, we will cut through the loops at the top. So don't worry if you ran short with one strip and you had to add a new one in there. That's perfectly fine. Don't worry about little ends hanging out because we will cut all the loops through and trim the ends when we're done. So that is our bath mat. I hope you're having fun following along and making your own that matches your unique home decor. And I will, I'm sure, see you soon.